Now, I know everyone loves clowning on Abaddon the Despoiler, but let's ask ourselves a very fair question. Could any of us reasonably have done any better?
When I need a job done, I get someone with a job to do that job!
What are you saying?
Hi, I'm Chrono the Harlequin, and today I want to look at Abaddon the Despoiler's reputation. Specifically, to consider if he really deserves his rap as a failure, or if he was doing the best he had with what he could, and if his general strategy was sound. Before that though, I would like to just say thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and please consider checking out my Patreon, where you'll be able to vote on upcoming video topics for this channel and view them a day early. Without further ado though, let's get into an analysis of if Abaddon is a good commander or not. Now, we need to start at the beginning, which is actually starting at the end of the Horus Heresy, that is. You see, the beginning of Abaddon's career as the quote-unquote leader of the traitor forces got off to a bit of a rocky start. And I should note, some of the sources for this video are fairly outdated. Specifically, I mean the Black Legion series by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, which is almost 10 years old at this point. However, at the end of the Horus Heresy, we're left off with Abaddon fleeing Terra with whatever strength he could muster from the traitor legions, specifically what remained of the Sons of Horus. It is at this point he is confronted by Garvia Loken, who had been there when Horus died to the Emperor, and he offers him a choice. Give up, lay down your arms, come with me, and I will make the case to Guilliman and Dorn to spare your lives and seek the process of penance, rather than just have them hunt you down for eternity. Because that would be endless, it would be senseless. It would be this war continued under a new name until the galaxy just burns out. But Abaddon states firmly that no, that's not going to happen because Guilliman will never accept that we were right and had a legitimate grievance. The grievance in question is that the Imperium was going to be handed over to mortals, something the Space Marines had been rankling against ever since the beginning of the opening trilogy of the Horus Heresy, that being Horus Rising, False Gods, and Galaxy in Flames. It is there that the Space Marines talk about how their conquests are going to be handed over to, quote, scriveners and bureaucrats. And again, this is something they couldn't get over. They just couldn't let go of the fact that the galaxy they won, through their blood, sweat, and tears, was just going to be handed over to others. Some legions like the Ultramarines were well prepared to cope with this, and others had plans on what they wanted to do after the fact, such as the White Scars who wanted to just basically leave the galaxy and hunt Xenos on their own terms. But the Sons of Horus, especially Abaddon, had no such way to cope. So, this seemed like the logical solution. Rebel against the Imperium that was going to cast them aside. They view the Imperium as their birthright. He says as much to Loken, it is our birthright. So, he wants to win it back, and more specifically win it from those loyal to the Emperor, because he views the Emperor as a deceiver, reason being for the aforementioned betrayal and the casting aside of the Space Marines. And we know this would have happened because of 1, the Emperor's treatment of the Thunder Warriors, and 2, Malkador openly stated that not all of the Primarchs, and by extension not all of the legions, would have been able to acclimate to life after the Great Crusade was done. So, with that in mind, it seems like the Chaos Space Marines are fighting for revenge against the Imperium. So, in that regard, it would seem like, at least according to the old lore, that Abaddon is not a good leader because he has very explicitly not done that. 10,000 years and 13 Black Crusades, yet the Imperium remains very firmly unvanquished. However, we can't just write Abaddon off like that. We have to discuss 2 important things: lore bias and the Crimson Path retcon. You see, lore bias is pretty obvious. Abaddon is going to lose because he's the bad guy. If he wins, the galaxy comes to an end as we know it. The Imperium is destroyed, the traitor legions are cut off from each other, warp travel becomes impossible, everyone is either subject to the whims of chaos, or dies outright. You can't let that happen, especially since there's no way to undo that. The only way to actually let it happen would be for an end-time scenario where you're going to reboot 40k into something different, like Warhammer Fantasy into Age of Sigmar, or as some people speculate, a time skip into Warhammer 40k, or something known as the Age of the Emperor, where he would truly ascend as a more active god instead of this limbo mortal god state that he's currently in. Also, GW just tends to be pretty bad about this sort of thing in general, an example being the fight between Abaddon and Marneus Calgar on Vigilus. You see, what happened was Marneus Calgar beat the crap out of Abaddon in their fight, sure, but Abaddon nearly killed him, summoning Drachnaen and cutting through both his primary and secondary hearts, as well as ramming his sword through his gauntlet. He had Marneus Calgar dead to rights, but suddenly got a coded Vox message saying, "The vengeful spirit has been ambushed and is seconds away from being destroyed. Get back here right this second because we need to make an emergency translation." So Marneus Calgar was spared. That is incredibly annoying, and simply put, I think if they're gonna kill off Marneus Calgar, it should absolutely be at the hands of Abaddon, but it should happen in a novel, not in a campaign book. And furthermore, now that we've seen the two of them fight, we have a pretty good scale for how strong Abaddon is. He's just a little bit stronger than Calgar. So, despite having the Talon of Horus, a sword made from the demon of the first murder, and 10,000 years of combat experience, he's just a chapter master tier. Marneus Calgar basically shattered his jaw in the fight and lifted him off his feet by cracking his breastplate that badly. And after that, Abaddon was only able to get in that really good hit on Calgar because Drachnaen went through Marneus's gauntlet instead of being blocked by it because of the nature of the sword. So again, he's just a chapter master tier. That is so weak. This man has been steeped in the warp for 10,000 years and has had all 4 Chaos Gods showering him with favor. And yet that's it? We've been led to believe that after all of this and with these gifts, he should be almost Primarch tier. But no, he's just that. Certainly stronger than when he killed Sigismund back during the first Black Crusade, but not much more past that. Now, I personally shouldn't be getting too much into the whole power scaling thing, considering the last time I tried that, it was my Titan vs. Gundam video, which people are still giving me crap for. But that being said, Abaddon is just not that strong, and his plan has not been successful thus far. So what real claim to leadership does he have aside from just being Abaddon and having the Talon? This is actually something that GW went out of their way to rectify in the 8th edition, with the introduction of something called the Crimson Path. And it is basically a new lore point that states that Abaddon's Black Crusades have actually been very secret covers for his long-term goal of destroying key worlds with Blackstone pylons on them across the galaxy, because these Blackstone pylons were keeping the powers of the Warp, and more specifically of the Eye of Terror, at bay. So if all of them were destroyed, or at least enough of them, the Eye of Terror would be able to spill out, which is what happened after Cadia was destroyed by the Blackstone Fortress being rammed into the planet. In that case, yeah, suddenly he is a good leader. Because he had a long-term strategy, he initiated proper operational security and stopped this plan from being discovered by anyone for 10,000 years, and managed to see it through, thereby tearing the galaxy in two. Now, I should note that mentions of the Crimson Path, that being the desire to destroy the Cadian pylons, was a part of Abaddon's whole plan ever since 6th edition, around 2012, but it was really changed into being the overall secret objective of all the Black Crusades back in 2017, with 8th edition. Again, I don't really like this change very much, but I should note that now that it is a thing, yes, Abaddon is in fact a good commander. But let's put that aside and talk about the pre-Crimson Path lore. Let me present a hypothetical. Let's say you were the leader of a small civilization of amphibious beings who were all functionally immortal, who could leave the ocean but primarily resided in it, and you were at war with the United States. So, you, being based in the Pacific Ocean, needed to figure out how you were going to wage war on this massive superpower with your arguably limited numbers. What you would do, in my mind, is slowly chip away at them. You would leverage the fact that you have a base of operations that you can enter and exit, but they cannot reasonably follow you into, the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. With that advantage, you would seek to leave the Pacific Ocean when you are least expected, attack, do as much damage as you can, and then, once the enemy is able to deal you a defeat, really start to rally, you just retreat back into the ocean before you yourself start suffering significant losses. Now, the crux of this strategy is to keep doing this. You just come back every, 40 to 50 years or so? Because by that time, all the people who fought you are now either too old to fight or are just dead. But you being functionally immortal have gained experience. And, hopefully, you will have dealt them more damage than they could hope to repair in 50 years, while you yourself didn't have to repair much damage or recoup many losses, something you can only do at a limited capacity, hence why you retreated quickly. And furthermore, you continue to change it up, sometimes attacking Northern California, sometimes Southern California, sometimes the Alaskan coast, sometimes Hawaii. One time you even made it through the Panama Canal and were able to attack Florida. The entirety of the United States is paranoid about you, and you are consistently in the backs of the minds of their command staff. And they're also simultaneously at war with Mexico, Canada, the EU, and dealing with consistent internal rebellions and uprisings. So you don't really have to do that much to bring down the United States in this scenario. All you need to do is inflict the death of 1,000 cuts, simply biding your infinite time until one of those attempts ends up being the 1,000th cut that finally brings the beast down, or until you just end up landing a really lucky hit. All things considered, it's actually a very sound strategy. It is the mark of a good general. It makes use of your natural advantages, it nullifies the advantages of the enemy, who are both very powerful but slow to move, and it will be fairly demoralizing for the enemy, who will become consistently paranoid about you, and will have no way to permanently put you down. However, just because this would make you a good general, does not mean it would make you a good leader. To be a leader of troops, you need to consistently inspire your men. You need to give them a concrete objective and actually win it. Otherwise, your troops are going to flatly lose faith in you and possibly even rebel against you. We saw something like this happen during the Third Crusade in our timeline, where Richard the Lionheart brought his crusading army to the edges of Jerusalem, but then, for good tactical reasons, turned his army around to invade Egypt in order to better starve out Saladin's army. But this demoralized his crusader troops, who had been promised glory and been told they would take Jerusalem. He brought them within sight of the city before turning around, which left his army incredibly demoralized. So, even though Richard was a good general, he was not a very good leader of men, and that is absolutely what Abaddon is not. I'm surprised he has not had more challenges to his power, simply because people would lose faith in him after this. His inability to secure victories, even though he is doing something tactically sound, would just cause his troops to splinter. And these are not just regular soldiers, these are Chaos Space Marines, egotistical warriors who are obsessed with their own glory and their patrons and their bravado. All things considered, it's no wonder that other war leaders make fun of Abaddon behind his back. That is honestly what I would call the biggest instance of Abaddon's plot armor. His ability to still command the respect and loyalty of so many Chaos Space Marines after all these quote-unquote failed attempts. And I think that's why GW went with this retcon when they did, to make him seem like a more intimidating villain instead of the Saturday morning G1 Megatron he used to be. However, there is one lore reason as to why the other Chaos Marines keep following Abaddon on these Black Crusades. They just have nothing better to do with their time. Their only other option would be to stay in the Eye of Terror sucking mud, waiting until something eventually gets them, or until they fall prey to demons, or they just run out of slaves to exploit, or just burn out their own numbers on ceaseless petty internecine conflicts with nothing to show for it. Remember, in the Black Legion books, Abaddon comes out of retirement to lead the traitor legions for Brotherhood, to reforge them into something new, to stop them just squabbling endlessly and bring them together as brothers, as they used to be, and give them a concrete goal to really do something. Because under whatever colors a Space Marine fights, they will be a Space Marine. And to be a Space Marine is to be a weapon. So these Chaos Space Marines were just weapons with no war, nothing to do. So in that regard, Abaddon would be serving as a pretty good leader, because he knows the real reason for these crusades. Not just revenge and to retake the Imperium, although those are valid reasons, but to keep the traitor legions together and really use their reason for existing. And I actually like that motivation better than any other one, simply because it's very human, it's very relatable. This is quite literally self-actualization. To feel like you're doing something, to feel like you matter, to feel like you have a purpose that is being fulfilled when you do what you do. Not just endlessly trudging forward to the grave, or in the case of the Chaos Space Marines, what would almost certainly just be a meaningless death when a younger subordinate stabs you in the back to take control of whatever tiny, petty warband you're part of. Now, the reason I'm saying this after I had already said that Abaddon is not a good leader of men, even though I am now in fact saying that he is a good leader, try not to think about it, is because the lore point this Brotherhood angle comes up in, the book Talon of Horus by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, is now over 10 years old. Because as we see in The End and the Death Volume 3, Abaddon assumes command and leads the traitors out of Terra's system and into the Eye. But in the Talon of Horus, he's a complete recluse living on his own in the Vengeful Spirit, meaning that between the flight from Terra and the First Black Crusade, every single Chaos Space Marine would have abandoned Abaddon to leave him alone on the Vengeful Spirit somewhere in the Eye of Terror. It just doesn't make sense. But we're left with two conflicting visions of what Abaddon is. The old Abaddon, who was an arguably poor general, but an excellent leader, or the new Abaddon, who doesn't really seem to be a very good leader, especially when compared to younger faces like Honshu and Huron Blackheart, but is an excellent general, because he had a long-con strategic vision that he was able to mostly bring to fruition. Another good example of this notion of Abaddon being a good general but a lackluster leader comes from the Arcs of Omen campaign, where he would work alongside the archdemon Vashtor, who seeks to become the 5th Chaos God, where he would actually achieve his objectives, that being, of all things, reassembling the planet of Caliban and making it into a super weapon called Wormwood, which could effectively tunnel a pathway between the warp and the material universe, much like the Webway, and in doing so he also utilized a device he created known as the Key, and went to go find the Lock, which contains behind it the weapon. Apparently the weapon was created by the Old Ones and has the power to destroy the Imperium, and elevate a being to a Chaos God level. So, after the 13th Black Crusade had succeeded in destroying Cadia, Abaddon made a deal with Vashtor, and then they were able to create Wormwood, and then the Key. Now they have to go find the Lock to get the weapon. All of which does play into the notion of Abaddon having strong strategic acumen. He's been hitting a lot of very important targets, and meeting general success wherever he goes. He took Marneus Calgar out of the action at Vigilus, even though he did have to quit the field. He cut a good strategic deal with Vashtor for them to work together, saw through the creation of Wormwood, got the Key, and is now looking for the Lock to get the weapon, yada yada yada. And notice my use of the word yada 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 there, because yes, those are all good strategic objectives that he has largely completed, but it's all kind of boring and not very inspiring. Taking out Cadia was very inspiring. That would have gotten everybody on his side and everyone hyped up. Mark of a good leader. But his good generalship with all this long-term strategy and minutia that he's been putting on after the fact isn't really all that flashy or isn't going to get anybody hyped up. Hell, even the quest for the weapon has just been one drawn-out fetch quest to get to another step, to get to another step, to get to another step. That's annoying when you do it in a video game. I would imagine it's much more so if you're doing it for a military campaign. People are gonna start to get bored and go off to do their own thing. And we know this to be true because that's how Vikings would function in real life. Sure, you could sack Lindisfarne and then Paris, but if you just start getting boring and start bogging down your warbands in sieges, they're just gonna leave. Which is largely what ended the era of Vikings in Western Europe. They started erecting fortified bridges and got better at city defense, so sieges became more common instead of hit-and-run sackings where they would have to be paid to leave after burning down an ancient city. And realistically, how different are Chaos Space Marines from Vikings? This is what made the older Abaddon more effective as a leader. He could appeal to that sense of brotherhood and warrior's honor in the same way the newer Abaddon doesn't really seem to be all that concerned with. But what do you guys think? Do you guys believe that Abaddon is better as a good leader or a good general? Do you think he is both? Do you believe that he has always only ever been neither? This is a very contentious topic, and one a lot of people are going to have a lot of opinions on. So as always, I would love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and I will see you in the next video.